Emma sat by the window of her small apartment, staring out at the quiet street below. The morning sun painted the buildings in shades of gold, but her heart felt heavy and gray. The smell of coffee filled the air, but she hadn't taken a sip. She held the cup in her hands, more for warmth than for drinking. She thought of David. Even his name felt like a soft ache in her chest. It had been months since their divorce, but time had done little to heal her. Every corner of her home still whispered his presence. The couch where they watched movies, the kitchen where they laughed while cooking, the balcony where they once planned their future, it all felt frozen in the past. She remembered the day he left. The rain had been falling, soft but endless, soaking the streets. He stood in the doorway with the suitcase in his hand, his eyes filled with sadness. He had said he was sorry, but she could barely hear him over the sound of her own heart breaking. When the door closed behind him, the silence was louder than anything she had ever known. Emma spent the first few nights waiting for a knock on the door, a message, but no knock came. No message appeared. Days turned into weeks. She stopped cooking because every meal reminded her of him. She stopped watching their favorite shows because the laughter felt empty without him beside her. Her friends tried to visit, but she often told them she was tired. In truth, she just didn't want to pretend she was okay. Late at night, she would lie in bed and replay their happiest moments. The way he used to smile when she made a silly joke. The way he held her hand while crossing the street. The way he looked at her like she was the only person in the world. Emma started writing letters she would never send. Pages and pages of words she wished she could say. She kept them in a box under her bed. Sometimes she would read them again and cry, her tears blurring the ink. She wondered if David ever thought about her, if he ever regretted letting go, but she knew better than to hope. He had made his choice, and she was left with the pieces. Some mornings, Emma woke up forgetting for a brief second that David was gone. She would reach out to his side of the bed, expecting warmth, only to feel the cold sheets. That moment, the one where reality returned, was always the hardest. She would pull the blanket over her head, wishing she could hide from the truth. Her apartment felt too quiet. The ticking of the clock seemed louder. The sound of cars outside felt far away. She missed the sound of his voice, the way he would hum while making breakfast. Sometimes she would play old voice messages just to hear him again, though it made her cry even more. One rainy afternoon, she found herself walking to the park where they used to spend Sundays. She sat on their favorite bench, watching the world go by. Children laughed, couples walked hand in hand, and the smell of fresh rain filled the air. She remembered how David used to bring her coffee from the little cafe across the street. He would hand it to her with a smile, saying, "For my favorite person." Now she sat there alone, holding nothing but her own hands for comfort. The days blurred together. Emma went to work, came home, ate little, and went to bed. The rhythm of her life had no joy. At night, she often dreamt of him. In her dreams, he was still hers. They talked, laughed, even argued about small things, but it was real. Waking up from those dreams felt like losing him all over again. One evening, she picked up her phone and typed a message to him. "I miss you." She stared at it for a long time before deleting it. She knew he wouldn't reply. She didn't even know if he would read it. That night, she cried until her pillow was wet. She whispered his name into the darkness, hoping somehow, somewhere, he could hear her. A few weeks later, Emma decided to clean the apartment. She thought maybe removing the physical reminders would ease the ache in her chest. She opened the closet and saw his old jacket hanging there. She picked it up, pressing it to her face. It still carried his scent faint, but enough to pull her back into the past. Her knees felt weak, and she sat on the floor, clutching it like it was the only thing keeping her alive. She found his coffee mug in the kitchen, the one with the chipped handle he refused to throw away. She found his handwriting on an old grocery list stuck to the fridge. She found the book he had been reading. Every object felt like a wound reopening. She realized that letting go was not as simple as throwing things away. The memories clung to her like shadows. That night, she went through the box of letters she had written to him, one after another. She read them aloud to the empty room. Her voice cracked, her hands trembled, but she kept going. She wanted to feel heard, even if no one was listening. When she finished, she placed the letters back in the box, kissed the lid, and slid it under the bed again. The next morning, she stood by the mirror and looked at herself. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her face pale. She barely recognized the woman staring back. She whispered to herself, "You have to keep going." But the words felt empty. She wasn't sure if she believed them. One Saturday, her friend Claire came to visit. Claire had been trying for months to get Emma out of the apartment. "Let's go somewhere," she said gently. "Anywhere you want, just for a change." Emma hesitated, but finally agreed. They went to a small seaside town, walking along the shore as the waves crashed softly. For a moment, Emma felt lighter, the salty air filling her lungs. But then she saw a couple sitting on the sand, holding hands, and the ache returned like a tide. That evening, Emma returned home from the seaside trip, feeling drained. The world outside felt so alive, but she still carried a heavy silence inside her. She sat on her bed and stared at the photo frame on the nightstand. It was the last picture they had taken together. David had his arm around her, and they were both smiling. She traced his face with her fingertip, as if touching the glass could bring him closer. She remembered the day they took that photo. It was just a simple afternoon in their kitchen. David had been making pancakes, and she had teased him about burning one. He laughed, pulled her close, and said, "If you're here, nothing's ruined." That memory burned in her chest now, both beautiful and unbearable. The loneliness in the apartment became too much. Emma started leaving the TV on, even when she wasn't watching, just to fill the silence. She played soft music at night so the emptiness wouldn't echo so loudly. But nothing could replace the sound of his voice. One night, she dreamed of him again. In the dream, he was standing in the doorway, smiling. "I'm home," he said. She ran to him, feeling the warmth of his arms around her. It felt real, so real that when she woke up, she reached out to touch him. But her hands found only the cold sheets. That morning, she cried harder than she had in weeks. Emma began writing in a journal every day. She poured out every thought, every memory, every piece of her heartbreak onto the pages. Sometimes she wrote to David directly, as if he might somehow read her words. "I don't know how to live without you," she wrote one night. "I'm trying, but it hurts all the time." The ink blurred when her tears fell on the page. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, but the pain refused to fade. Emma often found herself staring at the door, half expecting David to walk in. She knew it was impossible, yet her heart still clung to that foolish hope. One rainy afternoon, she sat by the window watching the raindrops race each other down the glass. The sound of the rain reminded her of a night long ago, when they had sat together on this very couch, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea. David had read a book aloud to her, his voice calm and steady. She remembered the way he looked at her, like she was the only person in the world who mattered. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from David's sister, Anna. "I hope you're doing okay. We miss you." Emma stared at the words, unsure how to respond. She typed, finally sending a simple, "I miss you all too." She didn't mention David. She couldn't bring herself to write his name. That night, she pulled out an old box from the top shelf of her closet. Inside were little keepsakes, movie tickets from their first date, a dried flower from a walk in the park, notes they had left each other over the years. She sat on the floor, holding each object carefully, as if it might break under her touch. Each one carried a piece of their life together, and letting go felt impossible. She thought about the last day they had been together before the divorce. They had argued, voices raised, tears in their eyes. But beneath the anger, there had been love that neither of them knew how to save. When he walked out, she had felt like the air had been pulled from her lungs. Now, alone in her apartment, she whispered into the quiet, "I still love you." The words hung in the air for a moment before dissolving into silence. She wrapped herself in a blanket and let the sound of the rain lull her into a restless sleep. The next morning, Emma woke up feeling unusually heavy, as if the sadness had pressed down on her during the night. She moved slowly through her routine, making coffee, feeding the small plant on her kitchen counter, opening the curtains just enough to let in a dim light. Everything felt mechanical, like she was just going through the motions of living. She decided to take a walk to clear her mind. The streets were damp from the rain, the air cool and fresh. She passed the little bakery David used to love. Through the window, she saw the same old baker, smiling and handing pastries to customers. The sight was both comforting and painful. She remembered how David would always insist on buying her favorite chocolate croissant, even if she said she didn't want one. She kept walking until she reached the park. The benches were wet, and the grass glistened under the pale sunlight. She sat under a tree, closing her eyes and listening to the wind rustling the leaves. It reminded her of afternoons when she and David would come here, sometimes talking for hours, other times sitting quietly, just enjoying each other's presence. Emma thought about how different everything felt now. People walked by, talking, laughing, living their lives. She wondered if anyone could see the grief she carried, or if she just blended in with the crowd. Maybe they thought she was just another woman sitting in a park, enjoying the breeze. But inside, she felt like a shadow of the person she used to be. As she headed back home, she noticed a stray cat following her. It was small, with matted fur and cautious eyes. She crouched down and extended her hand. The cat hesitated, then stepped closer. "You're alone too, huh?" she whispered. She decided to take it home, offering it a small plate of milk. Watching the little creature lap it up brought a faint warmth to her heart. For the first time in a long while, she felt a tiny spark of companionship. It wasn't much, but it was something, a fragile reminder that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't entirely alone. Days passed, and the little cat became a quiet presence in Emma's home. She named him Whiskers. He would curl up near her feet when she read, follow her into the kitchen when she cooked, and sleep beside her at night. His soft purring filled the silence that had once felt unbearable. Still, there were moments when the loneliness returned like a wave. One evening, while folding laundry, Emma came across one of David's old sweaters. It must have been left behind by accident. She held it to her chest, breathing in the faint scent of his cologne. It was faded now, but it still carried the memory of him. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she sank to the floor, clutching the sweater as if it could bring him back. The days grew colder. Autumn leaves painted the streets in shades of gold and red, and Emma found herself walking through them alone. She used to love autumn. It had been David's favorite season. They would spend hours taking photographs, laughing at how clumsy they both were with the camera. Now the beauty of the season felt bittersweet, a reminder of everything she had lost. One night, unable to sleep, she sat by the window with a cup of tea. The city was quiet, and the street lamps cast long shadows on the pavement. She thought about calling David, just to hear his voice. But her hands trembled at the thought. What if he didn't answer? What if he had moved on completely? Instead, she opened her journal and began to write. She wrote about the good times, the bad times, the nights they stayed up talking until dawn. She wrote about the fights, the misunderstandings, and the silence that had grown between them. The words poured out of her, raw and unfiltered. By the time she stopped, the first light of morning was breaking through the sky. She looked at the pages, her heart aching but strangely lighter. Maybe writing was a way to let go just a little. A week later, Emma decided to visit her parents for the first time in months. They lived in a small house outside the city, surrounded by tall trees and open fields. The drive there felt long, every passing mile filled with memories of childhood and simpler times. When she arrived, her mother greeted her with a warm hug, holding on a little longer than usual. "You've lost weight," her mother said softly, concern in her voice. Emma just smiled weakly and changed the subject. Her father was in the garden, trimming roses. He looked up, surprised but happy to see her. They spent the afternoon together, talking about everyday things: her father's plants, her mother's cooking, the neighbor's new puppy. But Emma could feel their unspoken questions, the quiet worry behind their smiles. She didn't tell them everything. She couldn't bring herself to explain the depth of her pain. She didn't want to see pity in their eyes. Later, as they sat at the dinner table, her mother placed Emma's favorite dish in front of her: chicken soup, just the way she liked it. The smell alone brought tears to her eyes. It reminded her of the times her mother would make it when she was sick as a child, and how safe she had felt back then. Now, even with her parents close, she felt a gap inside her that nothing could fill. That night, Emma stayed in her old bedroom. The walls were still painted in soft pastel colors, The same curtains swayed gently in the breeze. Lying in bed, she thought about the years she had lived here, before she met David, before her heart was broken. Back then, life had seemed full of possibilities. She closed her eyes and wished, just for a moment, that she could go back, not to escape her life, but to remind herself that she had once been whole, and maybe, someday, she could be again. When Emma returned home from her parents' house, the city felt colder, emptier than before. She unlocked her apartment door, and Whiskers greeted her with a soft meow, brushing against her legs. She smiled faintly, picking him up and pressing her face into his fur. But that night, the loneliness returned stronger than ever. She found herself scrolling through old photos on her phone, pictures of her and David from vacations, birthdays. In every photo, David's smile looked so real, so warm. Emma's fingers hovered over the delete button, but she couldn't do it. She wasn't ready to erase him from her life, even if he had already erased her from his. A few days later, Emma ran into a mutual friend of theirs at the grocery store. At first, she tried to smile and make small talk, but then the friend said something that made her heart sink. "I saw David the other day. He seemed happy. He was with someone." The words hit Emma like a stone. Her chest tightened, and she could barely keep her voice steady as she replied, "That's nice." She rushed through the rest of her shopping, ignoring the sting in her eyes. Back home, she sat on the kitchen floor, the groceries still in their bags, and cried until her throat hurt. She thought she had prepared herself for the idea of David moving on, but hearing it from someone else made it real. That night she didn't bother turning on the lights. She sat in the dark, holding Whiskers, and whispered, "Why wasn't I enough?" Her voice cracked, and the silence of the room seemed to swallow her words. In the days that followed, she kept to herself even more. She avoided friends and spent hours staring out the window at people passing by, each of them living lives that seemed whole and untouched by the kind of pain she carried. The next morning, Emma woke up feeling numb. She stayed in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts drifting between the past and the present. The sound of rain tapping against the window filled the room, but it didn't bring the comfort it once did. She thought about calling David, not to ask him to come back, but just to hear his voice. But then she remembered the way he had walked away without looking back, and the thought broke her all over again. She forced herself out of bed, made some tea, and sat by the window. She watched the raindrops race each other down the glass, each one disappearing before it reached the bottom. It felt like a cruel metaphor for her life, every happiness slipping away before she could hold on to it. In the afternoon, she went to the park, the same one where she and David used to sit together on Sunday mornings. She sat on their old bench, the wood still worn from years of weather. Around her, life went on. Children laughed, couples held hands, dogs chased sticks, but as she sat there, she pulled her scarf tighter and whispered to herself, "I miss you." The words disappeared into the cold air, unheard by anyone but her. When she returned home, she curled up on the couch with Whiskers and let the exhaustion pull her into a restless sleep, even in her dreams. David was there smiling, holding her hand. making her believe for a moment that everything was as it used to be. That night, Emma woke up suddenly. The house was silent, but her heart was racing. She had dreamt of David again, only this time it wasn't the happy memories. In the dream, she saw him standing in the rain, looking at her with cold, distant eyes. He said nothing, but his silence spoke louder than any words could. Unable to go back to sleep, Emma made herself a cup of chamomile tea and sat at the kitchen table. The ticking clock on the wall seemed too loud in the emptiness. She took out an old photo album and flipped through the pages. Each picture felt like a small knife, cutting a little deeper. One photo caught her attention: David, holding her close on their wedding day. They were both smiling. But now Emma could see something she never noticed. Before, his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. She wondered if he had been unhappy even then, if the seeds of their separation had been planted long before she realized it. Tears dripped onto the plastic covering the photo, blurring his face. She quickly closed the album, unable to take more. She walked to the living room, switched off the lamp, and sat in the dark. In that darkness, she spoke softly. David, if you're happier without me, I hope you find what you're looking for. Her voice broke, the words trembling with pain. But deep inside, she still wished he would come back. The days began to blend together for Emma. Morning turned to night, without her noticing, as if time had lost its meaning. She would wake up, make tea, feed Whiskers, and sit by the window for hours. Outside, the world kept moving, cars passing, people walking, but she felt like she was frozen in place. One afternoon, while cleaning the closet, Emma found a small box tucked away in the corner. She recognized it immediately. Was the box where David kept little souvenirs from their trips together. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were ticket stubs from movies they had watched, seashells from the beach they visited on their first anniversary, and a small note she had written to him years ago. The note said, "No matter what happens, I'll always be by your side." Emma pressed the paper to her chest and closed her eyes. For a moment, she felt like she was back in those happy days, before everything fell apart. But the memory only made the present feel colder. She placed the box back in the closet, unable to throw it away. It was the last piece of the life. She once had a life she didn't know how to let go of. That evening, the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, but Emma didn't notice. She sat on the couch, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of her own silence. A week later, Emma received a letter in the mail. Her hands shook as she looked at the sender's name. It was David. For a long moment, she just stared at it, afraid to open it. Part of her wanted to tear it apart without reading, but the other part needed to know what he had to say. Finally, she sat down at the kitchen table and carefully opened the envelope. The letter was short. Emma, I hope you're doing well. I'm writing to let you know that I've moved to another city. I think it's for the best. I hope you find happiness again, even if it's not with me. Take care, David. Emma's eyes blurred as she read the words again and again. There was no anger in the letter, no blame, just a final goodbye. And somehow, That hurt more than anything else. She folded the paper back into the envelope and placed it on the table. It felt like the last thread connecting them had been cut. That night, she didn't cry. She simply lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling emptier than she had ever felt before.